any girl can now jump on the internet and sell or show pictures of herself in bikinis or skimpy underwear or less. And the simp industrial complex just engages, right? And it kicks in, and it's like a machine now with the internet.
In scripture, we're going to be talking a little bit about Samson, and because of his infatuation with Delilah, that he ends up telling her, even though he tries to hide it 3 times, ends up telling her how she can corrupt his strength by cutting his hair. And of course, she betrays him. And so simping as a phenomenon is something very distinct from a man actually loving a woman and occupying their roles.
O Lord of hosts, be with us, for we have none other help in times of adversity but thee. O Lord of hosts, have mercy on us.
You know, we're going to be talking a little bit about cautionary tales and historical examples of simping. And it actually is something that's common among some of the more powerful men of history. And one in particular, which I think we're going to ask, is he the ultimate simp of history, is Napoleon Bonaparte. So we'll be getting into a little bit of that. But, you know, this was a topic. You mentioned that you had some free time, and we've been wanting to stream. I think it's been, months, the last few months.
Yeah.
So you reached out and said you finally had some free time. I said, great. What were some topics that maybe you wanted to chat, and you came up with this one? I thought, oh, wow, this is fantastic. So you want to maybe introduce what, the topic, and you had already been doing a little bit of preliminary research on it. How did that come up?
Well, I actually did a stream with Pearl like a year and a half ago on this, and when she got demonetized, that one is one of the ones that got taken down. It may be up somewhere on her Audacity network, I'm not sure, but I think some of her content was lost to the ages. So I had a bunch of the notes from it, and I thought it'd be great to revisit this with somebody who also has some historical knowledge and some theological knowledge on it. We could really kind of dig into it and do something more meaningful with it. So we're going to go over a few of the historical examples. And I think it's an interesting topic because I think people believe this is a new phenomenon because of feminism. And I would say there's certainly like an epidemic of it going on right now because we have things like OnlyFans and Instagram models and models. I object to calling them models, but the fact that any girl can now jump on the internet and sell or show pictures of herself in bikinis or skimpy underwear or less. And the simp industrial complex just engages, right? And it kicks in, and it's like a machine now with the internet. And you'll find this out too if you ever dare disparage one of these ladies of the evening, that the simps will come out in full force and attack you like a bunch of little goblins for disparaging milady. So it's certainly a big problem now, but it's something that we can go back to the book of Judges or even the book of Genesis and see. We can go back, in history and see that for powerful men, there comes a little bit of baggage with that because certain types of women are attracted to power and status, and they tend to cause problems. Father Moses McPherson got in a little bit of trouble with his video about the hot holy matrix, which I actually thought was fantastic.
Yeah, I thought it was a good video.
And was spot on. I know certain people got very, offended over it. It was the usual suspects, but I think there is this thing. It's not to say that beautiful women can't be holy, but it is to say that men need to be a little bit careful with certain types of women who, when they're very beautiful and very attractive, they find that they can have power and influence over powerful men or over regular men or both. So it'll be fun to take a look back in time and see that some things, really are eternal problems. There's nothing new under the sun. Right.
And so I think before we begin the conversation, it's important to always define your terms, right? So for anybody who may be listening and hearing about simping, all this different stuff, they may be asking, well, what exactly are they talking about? And I want to differentiate simping from like actual love and actual romance, actual relationships, caring for somebody and even putting their well-being beyond your own. That is not what we mean by simping. That's sort of the ideal of Christian love and devotion, especially between a husband and wife. But what we mean by simping are men usually driven by sexual lust who allow a woman to essentially dominate them, usually direct the orientation of their life, um, go with whatever their opinion may be on various subjects. We have examples, in scripture. We're going to be talking a little bit about Samson, and because of his infatuation with Delilah, that he ends up telling her, even though he tries to hide it 3 times, ends up telling her how she can corrupt his strength by cutting his hair. And of course, she betrays him. And so simping as a phenomenon is something very distinct from a man actually loving a woman and occupying their roles. And
Right.
I'm gonna say this, we've used this example before talking about Adam and Eve, and kind of tongue in cheek saying Adam was the first simp. And we as Orthodox Christians, we don't want to disparage anybody in the church or the Old Testament or anything like that as a sort of mocking of our faith. And so even when we say that tongue in cheek, what we're trying to insinuate and imply with Adam and Eve is that creation didn't fall when Eve ate the apple. Creation fell when Adam listened to Eve and disregarded the commandments that God had already bestowed in the Garden of Eden, therefore leading to the fall of creation. And it's this pattern of men abdicating their relationship with God and the rules and the standards set forth to then pursue the advice or the sexual lust towards women. And so is Adam simping for Eve? Well, maybe not in the strict definition that we're implying. It's not that he listened to Eve because of sexual lust or something, but this idea of acquiescing to a woman is the general framework of how a woman like sort of dominates a man. And what
Yeah.
we'll be looking at are examples of powerful men. So these aren't weak men. These aren't your basement dwellers who are subscribing to OnlyFans. Certainly there is a compatibility with them unable to control their sexual urges and desires, and then like giving tons of money to some girl online because she shows herself naked.
Yeah.
But we're talking about this dynamic, and we'll see this in Napoleon very, very clearly. A man who has immense power, he's conquering Europe, and yet he is bending over backwards for a woman who's essentially a harlot and writing these love letters. And we got little excerpts we're going to show you today that's going to be a little juicy. It's definitely going to be funny. A lot of you guys are going to laugh and enjoy it. But this is what we mean by simping. So anything you want to say or add to that in regards to the context of what we mean by simping? So when we refer to like King David and Bathsheba, or Solomon and his 700 wives and 300 concubines, in some of the other historical examples like King Edward or Henry VIII, these are very powerful men who essentially self-destructed due to the insatiable desire for, could be a particular woman, could be women in general. That's also a form
Yeah.
of simping.
Yeah, I would just echo kind of what you said, which is that we're not trying to say that. So, for example, if Andrew comes to me and he does this all the time and he'll say, hey, I got an argument I want to try in this next debate. Can I run it past you and see what you think? If he takes a little advice from me, that's not simping. Listening to wise counsel from a woman in your life is not simping. We're not saying that. What we're saying is it's more becomes a problem, like Patrick was saying, when men get obsessive over a woman, or they are so desperate for her either attention or her validation that they will do things they wouldn't ordinarily do. They will, shirk their responsibilities. They will make bad judgments that they kind of know are bad judgments because they just are so desperate for whatever approval or attention from this woman. I think that's simping. And it's the same thing with the online e-girls, where it's like, some of these e-girls could do the most horrific things, and they do. Like, some story will come out that one of them, cheated on her boyfriend, one of these streamer chicks or something, and the guy will still just, be following her around like a sad puppy and like, well, what do I have to do to get you back? And and he'll make a fool of himself publicly and everything else just over a woman. And that's where it becomes bad. And that's where it becomes, sometimes you can take out whole entire kingdoms this way, right? It's just like a Helen of Troy, there's a million historical examples of where one powerful man who is otherwise so competent and capable will lose it all over one chick. And it's often like when you examine who the women are, they treat the guy like crap too. It's not usually like a faithful, loyal wife that they're doing this for. It's like some lady of ill repute who treats him like garbage and doesn't want him, and so that's the one that they want. So yeah, we'll
Right.
get
They
into
sort of
I'm
lead
sure
them
we'll get
on.
into the psychology of simping just a little bit.
Right. And usually could be to a they're beautiful, so a physical infatuation. Could be to that the man believes that he's truly in love. I mean, when you look at Napoleon, he writes as if he's thinks that he's fully in love, but she's literally cheating on him, refusing to reply to his letters. And so this the psychology of the simp is a man who essentially given over his power to a woman, and there's multiple reasons why a man may do that. So first, I mean, how do you want to begin our conversation? Because I think what our goal was is we had a few biblical examples, Samson in particular, but I wrote down a few others that we could note. And one that I didn't write down was King Ahab. King Ahab was married to Jezebel, and
Yeah.
she was not an Israelite. And of course, King Ahab being weak and Jezebel being very beautiful, he eventually allowed human sacrifice back into religious practice, sacrificing children to Baal and Moloch. So that is a perfect example of how simping, to give it a sort of theological framework, does always lead to deleterious outcomes. So it's not like a man who simps, this actually is some type of building block for something bigger and greater. No, normally it's self-destructive. And in much of the
Yeah.
examples that we have today, it's going to be self-destructive. So this is clearly a pattern in history in which men are falling victim to their sexual desires, could be their fantasies in one way or another, and essentially eroding the foundation that actually gives them status and reputation. And Mark Antony is going to be another perfect example. We're going to be talking about Mark Antony and Cleopatra. This was another example. So do you want to begin with the biblical and some of the historical examples? Because I think our goal was to eventually get into Napoleon. We have a really cool article to read. I found something, somebody argues that Prince Harry is actually the biggest simp of history. And that's actually a really good example. I mean,
There's a compelling case to be made. Yeah.
yeah. Especially like, aren't they like not living together? I thought the rumor is like their own relationships kind of on the edge right now. And I believe he gave up his status within the royal family for her. And so
Yep.
then they moved to the United States, and then apparently he's been harassed and heckled by some Americans who see him out in public. So he's not getting royal treatment here in the United States. And the rumor that I read online, and who knows if it's true, I think it was on X, so this could be a total just fake rumor, but that their relationship's kind of on the outskirts right now, and there was discussions, or at least rumors, that they may get divorced. So
Yeah.
for a man to give up his identity in the British royal family and really being next in line in power, well, no, his older brother is. So
Yeah.
he was always going to be a prince, really.
Yeah.
But still giving up his status in the royal family. Pretty pathetic.
Yeah, it is. I think a good place to start, like if we want to go roughly chronologically, is with Samson and Delilah,
Mhm.
just because I mean it's kind of a great archetype of the whole thing. You've got Samson, who is at the time this like undefeatable military spectacle. He's this giant, huge guy. He's super strong. He was like kind of blessed by God with this something like supernatural strength is what it seems like to me.
Right.
And nobody could figure out how to beat him. His enemies just could not figure out how to beat him. And he and his boys are going through and taking over territories and converting people, I believe. I think it was like for the kingdom.
Right.
And so what his enemies did was they actually hired her.
Yes.
It's like they go and seek her out and they say, "Hey, you're seductive. You could probably pull this off. We need you to go in and seduce him and get him to fall in love with you so we can learn his secrets. And she says, okay. I think, does it say that they paid her?
Yes, 1,100 pieces of silver, and depending
There
on the
you go.
translation, it says shekels. Yeah, so it says that they found afterward it happened that he loved the woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. And the lords of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, entice him and find out where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him to afflict him, and every one of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver. So Delilah said to Samson, please tell me where your great strength lies, and with what you may be bound to afflict you.
Now, do you think he was wondering, why does she want to know that? Do you think he was like,
it seems like he's kind of picking up on, I mean, so for those who haven't read this passage, it goes back and forth 3 times. So she asks him, like, what is the source of your strength? And then he'll reply with a lie. So, the first one is, Samson said to her, if they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings, not yet dried, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. And then they try that. She concocts a scheme, ties him up with the bowstrings. The Philistines are ready to pounce. And as soon as they come in the room, he broke the bowstrings as a strand of yarn breaks when it touches fire. So then they try again. Then Delilah said to Samson, look, you have mocked me and told me lies. Now, please tell me what you may be bound with. So he said to her, if you bind me securely with new ropes that have never been used, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. So same thing happens. He breaks off these ropes very easily. And Delilah said again to Samson, until now you have mocked me and told me lies. Tell me what you may be bound with. And he said to her, if you weave the 7 locks of my head into a web of loom. So then she does that. But then she says, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. And he wakes from his sleep and pulled out a batten and the web from the loom. Then she said to him, how can you say I love you when your heart is not with me? You have mocked me these 3 times and have not told me where your great strength lies. And it came to pass when she pestered him daily with her words and pressed him so that his soul was vexed to death. We made comment of that backstage. So literally she nagged him until he couldn't take it anymore.
She literally nagged him to death, you guys. And I think all of us know couples like this. I think all of us know a couple like this, where the woman just is constantly, how can you say you love me if you won't do this thing that I want, or if you won't give me my way on this thing, and they get very hysterical and they pull on the heartstrings, and then they'll just nag and nag and nag until the guy finally goes, geez, okay, you can, fine, I'll give you what you want. And it's funny just to note that this is a problem that has plagued humanity from the start, apparently.
Right. And you can't get away from the idea. I mean, Samson here, real person, but if you want to use it as a sort of, if you want to approach this text symbolically, this is the strongest of men, right? This is the man of greatest strength. And we can see that this process, this withering away in his infatuation with Delilah, literally leads to the strongest of men falling victim and becoming the weakest of men. And this pattern, as we'll highlight, I mean, this is repeated through King David and his son Solomon. So we can see this throughout Scripture. And so he's vexed to death that he finally told her all his heart. So, don't tell her everything. No razor has ever come upon my head, for I am a Nazarite to God from my mother's womb. And so basically lets her know that his strength lies in his hair. So then she comes up with the plan. They cut his hair off. He becomes weak as a normal man. They take him captive. The Philistines rejoice. He's now in prison. And it isn't until he's sitting in prison and his hair's kind of slowly growing back. He's got a little bit of hair now. And then at the very end, then Samson called to the Lord. They come out to parade him out, to sort of humiliate him. And Samson calls the Lord saying, "Oh, Lord God, remember me, I pray, strengthen me. I pray just this once, oh God, that I may with one blow take vengeance on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. So they blind him as well once they incarcerate him. And Samson took hold of the 2 middle pillars which supported the temple, and he braced himself against them, one on his right, the other on his left. And Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." And he pushed with all his might, and the temple fell on the lords and all the people who were in it. So the dead that he killed at his death were more than he had killed in his life. So ultimately, the only way to redeem himself, the greatest, the strongest of men, was through self-sacrifice. Again, a sort of typology then of Christ, but not in the same degree. But we see the sort of redemption of Samson has to do with essentially him sacrificing himself and God bestowing him with the powers for a brevity within that period. So great.
It typologically does remind me, it reminds me a little bit of David and Adam and several other figures in the Bible who are probably also, you could say, they represent like Israel, and people. God gives you this gift, right? He gives you some kind of gift that's meant to serve him, and you give that up for something of this world, in this case a woman, in many other cases a woman, or lust, and kind of betray the Lord. You betray your responsibility by kind of giving this gift to somebody like an unworthy woman who's just trying to trick you because you're captured by lust.
Right.
And so you fall to your enemies, and like you said, the only way out of that is self-sacrifice usually. So I think it's like typological of a bunch of things at once. There's so much. I've read this story so many times, and every time I read it, I think of something else that I feel like it kind of symbolizes more than just the simping aspect, but this idea that like you're giving up something holy and God-given for something earthly, and that isn't going to give you what you want. Once you get it, it's not what you think it is. It's always that way when you make a deal, right? When you make a deal with the devil, you think you're getting your heart's desire, and it always turns out to be a trick, and it never turns out to be what you want.
Exactly. And his eyes being taken out, I think, is also poetic because it highlights that the sexual lust is a blinding force.
Yeah.
And simping is a blinding force. And often people that are deeply embedded in it probably don't recognize that they're engaged in it, or don't even recognize fully their infatuation and their giving away of their power in themselves to another woman. So the blinding, like one of the points that I made regarding this story was the first one is that he repeatedly ignored the warnings that Delilah was trying to betray him. I mean, what are the chances, Samson, that 3 times a Philistine woman, so she's not an Israelite, a Philistine woman is like asking you what takes away your strength, then does the thing that takes away your strength, and then says, "Oh, Samson, the Philistines are upon you," while she's like standing back and waiting for them to come in. And then they come in, and then he dominates, and then he's like lays back down and like falls back into his simping behavior with Delilah. It's like, dude, 3 times. Again, typology there, I think, indicative of the importance of 3 and the Trinity, and how many stories things happen in threes. But I mean, come on, bro. You don't see it? I mean, after the second time, you probably should have been pretty leery and said, all right, well, I definitely can't tell her where my strength lies because clearly she's trying to betray me.
Yeah.
But again, he's so blinded. And this ties in with orthodoxy, again, that the closer we get to Christ, the more we live that Christ-like life, the more we actually perceive. He really does heal our blindness. And as we move away from it, it really does blind us, that we really cannot see the things around us in a factual and accurate manner.
Yeah, I think so. Well, who do we have next on our list? Who do you want to go to next?
Let's see. I have, we can just make mention because there's some historical examples that I want to get into, but just make mention of like King David, obviously the adultery with Bathsheba. Like while his army was at war, David remained in Jerusalem one evening and saw Bathsheba bathing and lusted after her, despite knowing that she was the wife of Uriah, a loyal soldier. He summoned her, committed adultery, and impregnated her. To cover his sin, David then attempted to deceive Uriah into sleeping with his wife so that the child would appear to be his, which then failed. And David then arranged Uriah to be placed in the most dangerous battle position, thereby ensuring his death. So Nathan, the prophet, confronted David, delivering God's judgment. The sword would never depart from his house. His family suffered immensely. His son Amnon raped his half-sister Tamar, leading to Amnon's murder by his brother Absalom, who later rebelled against David and was killed in battle. David's failure to control his desires led to turmoil in his own household and nearly cost him his own throne. So there's another example of, again, this processes where the domino effect of sin, specifically sexual lust, King David being, again, one of the greatest warrior kings of all time, that he succumbed to it. Now, I know that there's actually a little bit of questions, and this may be part of the OnlyFans discussion, is that I've read one commentary, I think it was an Orthodox commentary, that mentioned that maybe Bathsheba wasn't totally innocent here because she deliberately was naked and went to bathe in front of the king so that he could see her from his window.
Right.
So,
wasn't she on a rooftop? Like,
yeah, something,
I
but it
think-
was out in the open, which she didn't
Yeah.
have to do. So there's I forget what it was. It was some glancing commentary that I was reading, but they insinuated, well, maybe this wasn't totally innocent. Certainly David couldn't control himself, but the woman may have played some part by like literally exposing herself nude in a way in which the king may be able to take a little glancy poo.
Oh, she would never do that. Women are born with halos. They're perfect angels until a man corrupts them. She would never.
Right. And then
I mean,
Go ahead, go ahead.
it tells you a little bit about the temptation for women too, right? And I've talked about this so much, and with you, I've talked about it a lot. How women, when we have our youth and our beauty, it's extremely tempting for us not to use it. It's like having a magic wand that can get you pretty much anything you want, and then you're told not to use it, right? Kind of like remember the TV show Bewitched, where Samantha, in order to marry her husband, he says none of your witchcraft, you can't use any of that. You have to like do the housework the old-fashioned way, and you have to deal with problems like a normal person, and it's so tempting for her not to use her magic. And I think it's like that's the temptation for women, right? Is like we can have this undue influence over men that we kind of know is sneaky, and we kind of know that it's not really right to do that to a man, but because we can't use force, or because we don't naturally ascend to the throne of power or something like that, it's very easy to use that instead to get what you want, to get your way, to get things for yourself. Usually is the downfall for the woman too.
Right.
Ultimately, it doesn't often work out well for the woman. We'll see that in a couple of my examples too coming up.
Right, but that leverage, I think that's a great point. Even equating it with a sort of magic. I mean, there's other commentaries I've read that have talked about women's makeup as a form of magic because it manipulates the perception of men, it manipulates the senses. And so this is a way to sort of inoculate themselves and manipulate men in a general direction towards the way that they want. And so I do think that is a really good point about the ways in which women can establish leverage, and how men controlling themselves is the only way to guard yourself against that leverage. And once you fall victim to that game, and you're so focused on the hottest baddie, the Instagram baddie, that that's the language of the kids, guys, language of the kids.
Right.
But that whole mentality is something in which is going to be corrosive, one, to the dynamic of the relationship, but as we'll see in multiple of these examples, you give somebody, for example, isn't it like Napoleon's second wife ends up, she's the Princess of Austria. We'll talk a little bit more about this. But once he loses in war, she leaves him and she goes and then gets with another high profile guy. So if your focus is on like the hottest baddie and the next girl you can get, well, you see, you've already participated in a dynamic in a game in which you are yourself entirely replaceable, because it's really just about garnering the attention of a man with resources. And therefore, it really doesn't matter if it's you or somebody else. It's about the resources and the attention that they want that then validates who they are.
Yeah, and I know that probably a lot of you guys in the audience are not fans of the Whatever podcast. Believe me, I understand. I totally get it. Even Andrew has stepped back because it was actually starting to, he said this on live on stream, so he wouldn't mind me sharing this again, but he said it was starting to eat away at him spiritually, having to listen to like some of the awful things that are told on that podcast and having to debate some really awful people on there. But I do think that it's important. I do think the show, like culturally, is going to end up being very important. And it's because it gives you a window into the mind of a young woman who is doing this. And especially in this day and age, they're very proud of it. So they have no problem telling you exactly. Like they'll open right up and tell you. And I've talked to many of them, and they'll say, oh yeah, I've drained guys' bank accounts. I've ruined their marriages. I've destroyed people's lives, but it's their fault because, they're simping for me. And if they
Right.
can't handle it and they're weak, then they deserve to get taken advantage of and they deserve to have their bank account drained by me. And they don't see, I just debated a girl on MDD, modern day debate, about, OnlyFans. And I got her to admit, and this was so important to me to get her to say this so that the young men watching, because MDD has a very male skewed audience, it's like 90% young men that watch that
Mm-hmm.
channel, to get them to listen to this woman from her own mouth say she hates and detests the people who pay for her extravagant
Right.
lifestyle. Yeah, I let them pay me, but I can't stand them. They deserve it. I see them as scum. I don't think of them as human beings. I think of them as wallets. Like she just came right out and said it. She had no problem saying she did not care about, getting some of these really young guys that start seeing this content at a very young age and they get kind of addicted or hooked on it and they can't find girlfriends IRL because of all the stuff that's going on with dating apps and because of the corn addiction stuff. And I brought this up to her and I said, it's so much harm that you're causing. And you're like this harm utilitarian, right? This is supposedly your worldview that you're not doing harm. And I'm like, you're obviously doing harm. Do you not
Right.
see that you're doing harm? And she said, well, I don't care about that harm because I don't care about those people because they're simps and they deserve it and they're scum and I'm better than them. Then this is oftentimes the attitudes of these women. And
Yep.
it's what using and abusing that power will do. I feel like it breaks them down and turns them into like almost something you can almost see them start to become like lose their humanity. They're like
Yeah.
losing what makes them humans because they're so drunk on this power that they have where they can just chat up a guy and get $2,000 deposited to their bank account for calling him a simp and they'll pay her to do that. I
Right.
think it does something horrible and that's why people are like, why are you always arguing with these women? Why do you always argue with them? And it's because I think that what they've been told that OnlyFans and using your sexuality is empowerment and that this is what it means to be a woman and this is what femininity is. It takes away any chance for them to learn humility or to repent. If you are constantly told that you're a goddess, you're perfect, you're gorgeous, you're beautiful just the way you are, there's no need for you to ever change, and that these men deserve what you're doing to them,
Right.
why would they ever come to Christ? Why would they ever learn humility? Why would they ever repent of this behavior? And it really can do horrible things to the women and to the men.
Right.
So I feel like as one of the few women who is willing to break rank with the sisterhood and challenge this bullshit, frankly, that
Right.
I feel compelled that I need to do it. So
Right.
if people are wondering why and they're thinking that I'm just clout chasing, no, I want to challenge these ideas and these, this crap that's taught to women that makes them feel so justified in doing horrible things to men
Right.
based on their sexuality. So just wanted to throw that
Well,
in there.
related to that point, this is why I think that it's apropos that some people have used the term the Jezebel spirit to sort of define this mentality of women, because as we just mentioned, Jezebel convinced her weak beta male husband, King Ahab, to condone human sacrifice. Now, I'm not saying the Jezebels of today are directly committing human sacrifice, although we can talk about abortion and that being tied with this sort of promiscuity and culture. I mean, yesterday I was doing a news stream and I highlighted this post that kind of went viral on X, and this was a Canadian woman. So somebody posted about the size. It was a very beautiful house. It was like $570 some thousand in Texas. And he said, because this discussion about Canada being the 51st state is called tensions between the two nations, and showing that, look what we can buy in America, like the beauty of this home, where Canada is experiencing a massive housing crisis. And this woman responded, and it was going viral, beautiful house, but can my daughter get an abortion? Or what she reframed as reproductive. Right. Does she get reproductive care? No, thanks. I'll stay in Canada. And it's like the idea that being able to afford a really beautiful home is secondary to a child being able to not have consequences based on promiscuous sex. So my point about the Jezebel spirit is, it maybe in some regards it actually does lead to direct human sacrifice, but it certainly is sacrificial of the correct and appropriate dynamic between men and women. And then you have all these disaffected men who maybe at one point or another in their teens or early 20s become a simp, sending money to an OnlyFans chick. And then maybe she actually responds with the attitude that you've already highlighted, that, you're beneath me. Like, I really can't care for you at all. Like, you can send me money. And I've seen so many videos, TikToks and X videos about women like bragging about some guy who sends thousands of dollars. And then, she promised a day where they could spend time, and it was like for 20 or 30 minutes. And she's like, okay, your time's up. And maybe he's dropped like $5,000-$10,000 on this girl. They don't care. That creates a sort of bitterness that then reconfigures the way that he relates to women, which in a very negative way. And this is where you get the MGTOW movement. Then you get all these men that say, oh, screw women and we're going to go our own way. And that's not good for society either. I mean, right now we have a population crisis. Like, we need to have babies, and we need not just having babies, we need families. And I want to bring this back up when we talk about Elon and his, his building of what I forget what he called. There's a message that Ashley St. Clair leaked, which was supposed to self-delete. So we're going to get into all that. But
yeah,
but he basically insinuated we have all these children to make, and that he just wants to have as many children as possible. And I highlighted that the CEO of Telegram has like over 100 children through IVF, none of which is he ever planned to be in their life. It's just about like spreading his seed as far and wide as possible. And this isn't good for society either.
No.
And so strong families with men and women in the appropriate dynamic of a loving husband and a respectful wife, like, that's the way that we actually form strong families, have multiple children, and actually are successful in society, not this sort of self-destructive human sacrificial system that we have now. And so I think the Jezebel spirit, to bring this all about, the Jezebel spirit really does sort of define this general dynamic that we're highlighting.
Yep, I think so too. So if we do go now to, do you want to do Napoleon?
Can I just sum up Solomon real
sure,
quick?
Yeah.
And then I'd want to get into Mark Antony, and then we can go straight into Napoleon, which we'll have a lot more to say about Napoleon.
Yeah.
So Solomon, last biblical example today. So just wanted to, and I chose these three because these are three strong, powerful men. And that's what Rachel and I were talking about before doing the stream is how these successful, strong men fall victim to this. This is something that is not unique to like weak men, as we highlighted. So Solomon, excessive lust and idolatry, despite his wisdom, his immense wisdom, Solomon's uncontrolled desire for women led him to take 700 wives and 300 concubines. I don't even know how a man has even the stamina to deal with all that. That's incredible. That's beyond my cognition. But many more foreign nations, these women turned his heart away from God, leading him to build altars to their gods. So that's where I highlighted the simping, right? So again, like Adam, and not to disparage Adam or not even to disparage any of these biblical figures, but we see that as soon as they engage in this behavior, they turn away from the commandment of God. So he then allows them to build altars to their gods, including Moloch, including Chemosh. Like, these are human sacrificial altars. These are human sacrificial gods. So therefore his downfall, he divided his heart and provoked God's anger through Solomon. Though Solomon was not immediately punished, God declared that his kingdom would be torn apart after his death. And what are the consequences? After Solomon's reign, his son Rehoboam inherited a fractured kingdom, and Israel was divided into two separate nations, Israel and Judah, leading to centuries of instability and decline. So again, just wanted to wrap that one up. Last biblical figure, but we see with David, we see the corruption within his own family. With Solomon, he kind of redeems himself right at the end, even though he loses both of his eyes and basically dies in a mass suicide with the Philistines. And then we see the same thing with Solomon. It's not the corruption of his family, it's the corruption of his entire empire, dividing it into two.
Yeah.
So and then the one I wanted to mention just before we get into Napoleon, because I think that is one of the juiciest ones, and it's going to be a lot of fun to cover, but is Mark Antony. When you were talking about historical figures, I was kind of reflecting like, geez, who is another one? And I thought Mark Antony. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Mark Antony, he was a Roman general and politician, one of the key figures in the power struggle after Julius Caesar's assassination. And so after meeting Cleopatra, right, this is the Queen of Egypt, he became completely infatuated with her beauty, intelligence, and political charm. Now, meanwhile, Cleopatra also had a relationship with Julius Caesar while he was still alive, right? So this wasn't some like pure woman, right? Apparently she's very beautiful and very sexual, dressed, very seductively. She used that leverage in a very serious way for geopolitical power for Egypt. And so after meeting Cleopatra, Antony becomes totally infatuated with her. He claims he loved her beauty, her intelligence, and her political charm. He neglected his Roman duties and spent excessive time in Egypt, absolutely to the detriment of the Roman kingdom. I mean, he spent months and months and months. He would just stay in Egypt, and they would have to send him messages, and he would make official political decisions from Egypt. This gave Cleopatra he gave Cleopatra huge amounts of land, essentially turning parts of the Roman Empire into her personal kingdom. He ignored, and this is, again, the ultimate sin here, ignored his Roman wife. The dude was married during this whole time to Octavia, the sister of Octavian, Augustus, who's going to, if you're familiar with Roman history, then becomes emperor, which caused a political scandal and alienated him from Rome. The downfall and consequences, I wrote 5 bullet points here. Octavian used Antony's devotion to Cleopatra to turn the Roman Senate against him, branding him as an Egyptian puppet. And then if you're familiar with the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, this is a naval battle. This is the last battle of Mark Antony, in which he is trying to fight against his own Roman Empire with the aid of Cleopatra, and she's really financing much of this. So a bunch of gold and money is coming out of Egypt, and she's kind of helping Mark Antony fight his own empire against him. And at one point, she flees the battlefield. Now, Mark Antony put all the gold on her ship, and this was for a strategic reason. But at one point, he begins to lose the battle, and she then on her ship, she just sets sail. She just gets the hell out of there. And he sees this, and he begins to chase after her, essentially conceding the whole battle. He gave up the battle to run after Cleopatra because he wanted to make sure she was safe, wanted to know what was going on. She had all the money. And so after chasing her, eventually and losing the battle, Mark Antony commits suicide, leaving Cleopatra alone, in which she then killed herself, and Egypt became then an official Roman province. And his loss of power, his reputation, his life, all of it was lost due to simping over one woman.
That's crazy. That's crazy. I didn't know like the details of that and how it ended. So that's wild. You see like this theme I'm noticing of like people not just betraying like their own duties or themselves, but like their whole kingdoms. Like you got a whole kingdom of people that you're responsible for.
The strongest one in the world, the Roman Empire. I mean, before right after Julius Caesar. Like, this is the
And
strongest
they're like,
empire in the
they're
world.
just like, but she was hot. She was so hot. You don't know. You don't understand how hot she was. It's just like,
it's pathetic. So now I want to turn our attention to Napoleon.